Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you can all see and hear me. It's just coming up to 3 o'clock, so I would like to make a start. There's quite a lot for me to get through. Thank you for joining this afternoon. I appreciate some of you may have been watching other seminars. Some of you may have just logged in for the odd seminar. So thank you for joining me. My name is Mark Lewis, and my session this afternoon is titled, as you can see on the screen, hopefully, Keeping the UK Safe, What Part Can I Play? Or what part can language professionals play? So, without further ado, what I'd like to do is just take you through what I'm going to talk about this afternoon. There may be people out there that have heard me speak before, but there may be some of you that have never heard me speak before. So I'll give you a little bit of background about who I am and what my role is currently with Leicestershire Police. Then I'm going to talk about who this presentation is aimed at. Well, it's aimed at everyone really, but I've had to set it at a certain level, and I'll explain the level that I've set this presentation at. Hopefully it won't encourage people to leave. Hopefully you'll all find it interesting, but there was a level I had to aim at, and I'll explain that. Then I'm going to talk about the types of police interpreting and translating. After that, we'll talk about some examples of police interpreting and translating across the UK. I'll give you those examples, and I've got 3 different examples for you. And then I'm just going to talk briefly, for those that don't know, about what you need to do to be an approved police interpreter, to take face-to-face assignments. So during this presentation, I will talk about telephone interpreting and translation, transcription, but the main focus today is on those of you who may be interested in doing face-to-face assignments, which is the majority of the work that's done by police forces around the country. And then, of course, the all-important questions. I want to leave as much time as possible for questions so I can answer as many as possible. So at the top of your screen, there will be a section that says Q&A. By all means, start typing. I won't read them until I've finished the session, and then I'll start looking at the questions, and we'll find the interesting ones and try and answer as many of them as possible. I hope that's all okay for you. So, who am I? I spent 30 years in the Metropolitan Police, and I retired as Detective Superintendent from the Counter-Terrorist and Protective Security Command at Scotland Yard. Now, I always mention Scotland Yard. All around the world, in the law enforcement world, Scotland Yard is well known, it's famous, as you know. They're actually at their 4th location. There's been 3 other locations before it arrived where it is now on the Victoria Embankment. But that's where I ended up after 30 years service. That's where I retired from. During that time that I was in the police, I became a trained hostage negotiator and used interpreters. Obviously, in the Protective Security Command and the Counter-Terrorist Command, I used interpreters a lot. In fact, throughout my time in the police, I used many interpreters. I was a trained senior investigating officer known as an SIO and a counter-terrorism SIO. That meant that I led all kinds of investigations into all kinds of crimes, leading not only my own investigations, but teams of officers on investigations as well. And then I did lots of other roles, including public order, which is the guys you see with the riot helmets on and the riot shields, etc. And I was a firearms officer and a roads policing officer, a traffic officer as well. So I've had a very varied career. And in all of those roles, I've used interpreters. And I thought it'd be fun to just show you a couple of pictures. I don't think there's anyone out there that's old enough to remember this kind of car. It's a Rover SD1, and there's a strange guy sitting there. I don't look anything like that now. I wish I could grow a dark moustache like that. There's a picture of me on a police bike showing that I did roads policing as a superintendent, and there's a firearms picture. These are just showing you that I've done various roles, and any of you that do police work, I probably dealt with the kind of things that you get to deal with. I just wanted to touch briefly on the roles that I've done since retiring from the police. I worked in various industry sectors for 8 years, but almost always working alongside the police. So I was still working with my colleagues. And then in June 2018, I joined the Big Word as the police account manager. My job was to ensure that all the contracts that Big Word held with police forces around the UK were carried out correctly, and that we were supporting the interpreters as well as the police to make sure that the accounts ran smoothly. And then June 2020, this year, I joined Leicestershire Police, back in the police again, working under my boss, Ian Fraser, as a National Police Framework Contract Manager for Language Services. So I'm not going to talk today about the police framework. There is a police framework out there that I've talked about on many other presentations. And if you do a Google search, you will find that there's quite a lot about that framework if you're interested in how the police procure their services. So let's talk about my role. I'm employed by Leicestershire Police. I don't live in Leicestershire. So why is it Leicestershire Police? The answer is that every chief constable in the country is responsible nationally for a particular aspect of policing. So the chief constable of West Yorkshire is responsible for police helicopters and the use of police helicopters. And it just so happens that the chief constable of Leicestershire is responsible for use of police interpreters and language services. So under him, I am responsible for all that. So what do? I liaise with almost every police force in the UK to make sure that they're using interpreters correctly and to provide advice and support to them. And I liaise with all the language service providers. Now, let me explain. There's terms that I'm going to use that are interchangeable. I know that in the BSL world, a language service provider is the interpreter. I'm talking about the agencies when I talk about liaising with all language service providers here. So I engage with all the agencies that provide police interpreters or aspire to provide interpreters to the police. I liaise with as many of the language professional organisations as I can. You will see that I write letters, open letters to NERPC. I meet regularly with Mike Orlov from NERPC. I liaise closely with the Association of Interpreters and Translators, the AIT, with Irina Norton there, and provide some presentations for them. Along with that, I deal with NRCPD, and I could go on listing all these different organisations, but all I want to assure you is that I spend time talking with as many of these associations as I can to make sure that we're all on the same page when it comes to police work, that we're all working for the benefit of the end user, which is the person that needs the language service provided, but also we're taking into account your needs as interpreters and translators as well. I liaise with individual interpreters as appropriately. I have interpreters that get in touch with me, asking for advice, giving me information, and there's some that I've worked with, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. There's interpreters that I've worked with over many years that still keep in touch, and I seek their opinions whenever I can. I liaise with the College of Policing and academics regarding advice, guidance and research. The College of Policing is responsible for putting out guidance to police officers on use of interpreters and translators, transcribers. And around the country, there's some really interesting work being done by academics in universities and other locations, looking at how police use interpreters. And I love reading all those papers and debating and discussing with those academics. So I spend time doing that. And my role is to provide training to whoever needs it, mainly to the police services, but also to interpreters and other agencies as and when required. Okay, who's the presentation aimed at? This presentation is aimed at interpreters and translators who don't currently undertake police assignments in the UK. So you may be interested in doing police work. You may have stayed well away from it because of the reputation the police have in the country that you come from. Or if you were born and bred in this country, you have a particular view of the police assignments and you're not interested in doing them. I'm hoping to change your mind. That doesn't mean that the rest of you that are listening in aren't welcome. Hopefully you're going to find some of the stories I tell interesting. We'll do the questions and debate them as much as we possibly can in the time that I have. So although it's set at the level of interpreters and translators who don't currently undertake police assignments, everyone else is extremely welcome. So thank you for joining today. So for those of you that haven't done police work, let me just talk about the types of police interpreting and translating. We have face-to-face interpreting for a detained person, a person who speaks a foreign language other than English as their first language, is arrested, and the police can't talk to them without the help of interpreters. So that would be at a police station usually. It may happen at a prison, but usually it's at a police detention. Face-to-face interpreting for a victim. Someone gets their bag snatched while they're walking down Oxford Street or any shopping centre. English isn't their first language. The police will provide an interpreter to talk to them to ensure that we get a really good statement of facts. Face-to-face interpreting for a witness. Exactly the same. A witness sees something, sees a crime and wants to help the police, but English is not their first language. Then the police will provide an interpreter to assist that witness to give their statement. We also have, the top three are evidential. They're reasons why we need an interpreter to assist us with gathering evidence. But the police are engaging in so much more than evidential gathering. So we may have a public meeting, even a member of the public or a visitor coming up to a police officer in the street who needs directions or doesn't feel well or needs some help. It's not evidential, but they may need a telephone interpreter to help them, or there may be a face-to-face interpreter working on another job at the time who's available. So as I've just mentioned, we have telephone interpreting as well. Often used when a person is arrested and brought to a police station, because while we're waiting for a face-to-face interpreter to arrive, we can give that person their rights with the help and assistance of an interpreter who's on a telephone. So that's the telephone interpreting. Also used extensively in 999 control rooms, where someone phones up, requires help of the police, but doesn't have a good grasp of English. Then the control room staff will use a telephone interpreter to find out what that person needs in the way of police help. Then we come on to translation. We require translators to translate police documents for us, all kinds of things. We may require a letter asking for a police officer to get assistance in a foreign country, in which case there is a letter that's written and has to be written in the language of the country that the officer is going to go to. So we would require that, as well as some of these statements I've talked about at a later date being translated into English for us. And then transcribing audio files. Now that could be threatening messages on a victim's telephone, mobile telephone, or home telephone service, or it could be an interview that's been conducted in another language and then needs transcribing into English. So we have translate and transcribing services. I thought it might be useful to give you a rough idea of the volume of work that's done by our fantastic interpreters around the country. So let's look at face-to-face deployments. So face-to-face assignments in 2019 across the UK. Actually, that's across England and Wales. It doesn't include Scotland in this. 25,160 in a year, which works out at 483 a week, roughly about 70 assignments a day across England and Wales. And then I thought it might be useful to show you some of the top 10 requested languages. This is an average across England and Wales. It's not specific to any particular region, and I'm going to show some specifics about that a little bit later. So the top language in 2019 for face-to-face interpreting was Romanian. Now let me make this clear. That doesn't mean there were more Romanians arrested than any other nationality across the UK. What it means is there were more contacts with Romanian people than any other spoken language across the England and Wales. So that includes victims, witnesses, people coming into contact for all sorts of reasons. Polish was second, Lithuanian was third, Arabic was fourth, Urdu was fifth, Punjabi was sixth, Kurdish Sorani was seventh, and then all the other dialects of Sorani were eighth. Then we had Albanian, and then we had Russian. I wanted to just show you some of the rarer languages, and it would be fantastic if I mention a language that one of you out there listening and watching actually speak. Bahasa Malaysian, I hope I pronounced that correctly. Dinka, Southern Central. Chichewa, Maltese, Edo, Chechen, Estonian, Welsh, Bailan, I believe that is, and Mongolian. So they're just some of the very rare languages. And I know for a fact that each of those, I had lots I could have chosen from that only had 1 or 2 assignments in the year, but each of those only had less than 3 assignments in the year where interpreters were required to come out and help someone who spoke that language with whatever reason it was that they needed help. So that was Face-to-Face. What I'm now going to do is talk about telephone interpreting, and I've specifically looked at London. So this is the Metropolitan Police area and City of London, and I've got their figures to show you for last year. So in 2019, there were a total of 76,000 telephone interpreter calls for any person speaking any language for any reason. That doesn't mean there were 76,000 times that someone was arrested. Those telephone calls could have been made for all sorts of reasons, and I'll talk a little bit more about that when I come on to some examples. So that 76,000 a year is about 1,460 a week, almost 210 a day. So I thought I'd show you the top 10 languages for London telephone. This doesn't mean it's the same for their face-to-face, but these are the top 10 telephone. Romanian, and I'll come back to a comparison in a moment. Polish, Spanish, Arabic, Turkish, Portuguese, Bulgarian, Punjabi, Bengali, Mandarin. Now let's have a look. What I'm now going to do is compare the previous list on the previous slide. So Romanian there was spoken, probably the highest used language across the UK, certainly England and Wales. So that stays the same. Polish was second. Lithuanian was the third highest used language for face-to-face interpreters, doesn't appear in London's top 10 for telephone interpreting. And I find this interesting that around the country, there are certain pockets of people who speak a certain language that seem to stay in that area. I know that Italian is a difficult one for us to find in Leicestershire. But here we have Arabic at 4th, both for London telephone interpreting and across the rest of England and Wales for face-to-face. So there's a comparison there. Then we have Urdu. These were the previous lists. Punjabi, which is on both. Kurdish Sorani, which didn't appear in London in their top 10. And then the other Sorani dialects. Albanian is on there, and Russian. So you can see around the country, there is a difference between top 10 languages. So that list on the left is specific to telephone interpreting last year in London, and the list on the right is the average of those language uses across England and Wales. So I found that quite interesting. Okay, so let's talk about examples of police interpreting and translating. Essex Police, December 2018. I was involved in this, and I just wanted to spend a little bit of time giving you a story, a true story of what happened. So this ship is the Grand Teamer. It's a very large container ship. This photo doesn't do it justice. I walked up onto the back deck of it, and it's absolutely massive. And it's normally stacked high internally and externally with cargo boxes. So this ship spends time travelling between the coast of Africa and Grays in Essex, or Tilbury in Essex. And it was on a particular journey in December 2018 when the crew of the ship suddenly found out that they had stowaways on board. So I'll try not to make this humorous, but it is difficult not to laugh. The crew locked the stowaways up. The stowaways managed to get out and started rampaging across the decks. So the crew locked themselves in the bridge. The stowaways then assaulted the bridge and managed to get in. So the crew managed to escape and lock themselves away in another part of the ship. So we now have a ship, a very large ship, traveling up the channel, the English Channel, under the command of stowaways who probably have absolutely no idea how to steer it. And it's interesting for me that actually this has happened in the last couple of weeks again, but I'm only talking about the one from 2018 because the court case is finished. So this is from a newspaper, this next picture. But what happened was special forces, the special boat service, have a plan for this. They fast roped off a helicopter onto the deck and they took control of that boat back again. Put it back in the hands of the captain who steered it into port in Essex. And Essex Police had the difficult job of investigating to find out what offences, if any, had taken place. Well, interpreters were assigned to this and spent long days helping the police to interview the crew. Now, the boat was on a very tight schedule, the ship rather, for those of you that know about it, it's ships, not boats. So the ship was on a very tight schedule and had to leave. So there was a plan made for the ship to return in 3 months' time and more of the crew to be interviewed. It's the only way we could do it. While that ship's in port, it's not making any money for the owners and the people that have the all the cargo on it as well are losing money. So we made a plan for that ship to come back, dock, and we would interview as quickly as possible those that were left that hadn't been interviewed from the crew. Tides play a big part in this, and our dear interpreters were put off time and time again when we said, sorry, there's been winds and the ship's not going to arrive tomorrow. Our face-to-face interpreters were absolutely fantastic. They were resilient, and when the ship finally docked, we picked the interpreters up from a railway station, brought them to the terminal, and they did a wonderful job of interpreting for us so that charges could be brought. So that's just one example, and clearly you know that not every job done for the police is so exciting, but I was proud to be a part of that investigation in a small way, and I was proud to have been able to assist interpreters to help keep shipping lanes safe by dealing with these criminals. So that's one example. I want to give you another example. Again, it's Essex Police. It's a very infamous case, unfortunately, from October 2019 in Grays, when tragically this cargo lorry had the back doors opened and it was found that 39 Vietnamese people had lost their lives, suffocated in the back of that lorry. Horrible, horrible case. An investigation, a murder investigation, was launched immediately. Essex Police did a fantastic job of telling us what they needed for interpreters, and we were able to get a large number of a very small pool of Vietnamese interpreters to Essex Police HQ so that they could assist. The interpreters did an absolutely outstanding job in terrible, terrible circumstances. They did face-to-face interpreting for the victims, to identify victims. They did family liaison, and they assisted with the investigation by allowing the police to speak through the interpreters with family members. I said earlier about telephone interpreting. This was an example where interpreters, face-to-face interpreters, were used to make telephone calls to do family liaison in Vietnam, and maybe for some of the victims' families who still lived in the UK, had come here already. So they did a fantastic job. And there was translation of multiple documents. These lorries had been traveling across Europe and further afield for quite a while, bringing people into the country who fortunately didn't end up victims. But what happened was CCTV footage was made available from around Europe as the police officers in those different countries did the investigation. But of course, they would do their evidence statements in their own language, quite rightly. So we had interpreters in this country providing translations of those statements and helping the police to uncover all the evidence. And again, this has just gone to court, and the people have been found guilty of people trafficking, various offences, and manslaughter. So the interpreters all got commendations and thanked by Essex Police, and that's so important because it was a long, arduous task that they completed, working long hours in terrible circumstances with very upset victims, family members, and very upset police officers. So thank you. If any of you out there are watching and listening to me and were part of that, you know how proud I am of you. And the third example, excuse me, a third example I want to talk about is one that I dealt with. A personal one from 2009, and I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to rattle through this. Anyone who's been to Archway or Whittington Hospital may well know this. Hornsey Road Bridge, known as Suicide Bridge. I'm not making it up. It's actually shown on Google. I searched and it came up. Very high Victorian bridge, long drop over the roadway there. That's the A1 that takes you from London to Scotland. That's the view from the top of the bridge. That isn't a very new view because there's lots of new buildings now that aren't there. When I was there in 1980, this incident is 2009, but when I was there in 1980, I remember walking up that hill one night, looking backwards at the London, and it looked totally different in 1980. And there's a view of the bridge, and it's not a very good description of the bridge because it's really quite high now and has all sorts of devices on it, anti-climb devices to stop people in crisis wanting to jump. On the incident that I'm going to talk about in November 2009, excuse me, there was a lot of scaffolding up there, and the local authority were repainting, and they'd been told really that they shouldn't leave scaffolding up there. They should use cherry pickers and take them away. But as it was, the bridge had scaffolding, and a Chinese lady was seen to climb up and climb over. And I was the hostage negotiator on call. I was called to it early afternoon. And this lady spoke no English whatsoever, was clearly distressed. And we managed to get a Mandarin speaking interpreter to the scene really quickly. And after many hours of discussion, we managed to talk this lady down. And I was going to go into the detail as to why she wanted to take her life, but I'm conscious of time and I don't think it's appropriate actually. So this was an example where a Mandarin interpreter was driven to the scene in a police car and spent hours with me. It was November. It was a lovely sunny day, but it soon got dark and cold. We're in November now and it's 3:30 and it will be getting dark soon. I recall as it got cold, the scaffolding and the bridge all got very wet because of condensation, etc. It was not a nice place. And I was very grateful to that interpreter for what they did in saving a life. So what do you need to do to be approved to take police face-to-face assignments? Now, many of you who are already interpreters for the police will probably just do your emails now or maybe sign into another show because you're going to know all this. But for those of you that may be interested in taking on these kind of things, first, you need to obtain a qualification that's accepted by the police, and that's a diploma in public service interpreting with a law aspect, so a DPI law, or a diploma in police interpreting, which used to be the MET test, but is now specifically related to police interpreting more than any other kind of interpreting like health or other bits of the public sector. You need to obtain non-police personnel vetting, NPPV3 vetting. For those interpreters that are listening who are already doing police work who have NPPV2, we are honouring that until such times as it expires, and then you will need to get a level 3 because level 2 will no longer be accepted. You need to obtain 400 hours experience in public service interpreting before you're able to start doing police interpreting. I'm not going to talk about the police dynamic purchasing system. But what I will say is I'm looking at this 400 hours and in debate with NERPC and various other organisations to see if 400 hours might be too long to wait to start doing police work. So we are looking at that, but this is what the specification says at the moment. And then for most police forces around the UK, to enable yourself to do police assignments, you need to be registered with one of those agencies that provide face-to-face interpreting to police forces. Being on the NERPC register does mean that if an agency can't find someone from their own list, they can then go to the register and see if there's someone suitably qualified. There's one other thing that I just want to point out here. The police have in law the right to give inspectors authority for someone at lower level than this, so less than MPPV3, less than 400 hours in interpreting, or someone who doesn't have a DPI or a DPSI, to do that work. There would be a risk assessment, and if that's the only person that's available or willing to take the work, then with an inspector's authority, it can take place. So although this is set in law that this is what we expect, we know that market forces are showing that there's sometimes, particularly with the rarer languages, just not enough people out there. And of course, we know that you can't get a DPI or a DPSI in some of the rare languages, but we are working with the Chartered Institute of Linguists to try and improve the chances of you getting a qualification if you speak a rare language. And now we're on to any questions. So please bear with me. What I need to do now is have a look at the question list, and I'm going to ignore my vanity and put my glasses on so that I can have a look and see where we are with this. Okay, so questions. How do you contact interpreters? Alina has asked this. So the police don't contact interpreters. Thank you for that question, Alina. The police don't contact interpreters in most forces. In the southwest of England, Avon and Somerset, Devon and Cornwall, etc., they don't have a contract with an agency. Therefore, they will use people on the NERPC register. So the police officer would go to the NERPC register, start looking down the list to see who's available nearest to the area that he needs that interpreter with the correct language, and would make the phone call himself. But most forces around the country have a contract now with a language service provider. The three big ones that are providing at the moment are Sintra, Capita, and the Big Word. On our framework, there are some other companies that are also authorised but don't have any contracts yet. So hopefully, Alina, that answers your question there. There's a load of applause there for interpreters. I'd echo that completely. There's a Met interpreter there saying that they're going to leave now. Thank you so much for your presentation. Thank you, Angelina. I appreciate your thanks. Okay, so Irina Norton, who I mentioned earlier, is asking, will interpreters who have DPSI health be able to work for police if they have already been providing their services for over 10 years? Irina, I'm not sure if you mean that they've been providing the service to the police or if they've been providing a service to health. If someone is only providing to health, and I don't mean only, but if someone is providing interpreter services but isn't providing them for police work and doesn't have a police qualification, then they will need to get the police qualification. If someone has already been providing police services but doesn't have the police qualification, then there are questions about why they were allowed to do it, but that's not the fault of the interpreter. So what we're looking at is some form of quick test that we can ask the interpreter to take to ensure that they are capable, because of the experience that they've had over those years, that they're capable of doing police interpreting. And what I mean by that, they need to have a rough idea of what's happening with police work and some of the language that's used within the police environment. And as you know, in any sector you work in, there's a specific lexicon, there's a specific language that's spoken only in that sector. But we also need to know that they can speak and write not only the language that they are interpreting for, but they also need to be able to speak and write English proficiently. And hopefully they'll have a qualification in that. So Irina, I hope I've answered that question. Maria, I hope I pronounced that correctly, has asked, do you often need Russian interpreters? Look at I think you probably asked this long before I gave the answer. But yes, you can see Russian comes up, particularly in London, quite a lot. So yes, we always need more Russian interpreters. Actually, the lady I spoke about earlier, Irina, is a Russian interpreter and is very busy. Is German a useful language for the police force? Emily, this is going to upset a lot of people, but I'm going to tell you what I tell everyone. English people, on the whole, and I'm talking generally, are not very good at speaking other languages. We learn English, and when we go on holiday, and I don't include myself in this category, but when English people go on holiday, if you don't understand what they're saying in a remote part of a Greek island, they'll shout at you in English. But Europeans all speak lots of languages. It's unbelievable to me. There's a lady who may be watching this who speaks at least 7 languages. She's a police interpreter. I knew that she spoke certain languages. I had a Turkish coffee with her and she spoke to the Turkish owner of the shop in Turkish. Unbelievable. And I know that around Europe, there are lots of people who speak so many languages. And I know that English is an international language for aviation and marine and various other sectors. But here's the point that might upset some people. I hope it's going to make you smile. If someone who wasn't born in this country and doesn't have a very good grasp of English is ill in the street and a paramedic comes to help them, they will use any language they possibly can to try and get themselves understood. The minute they get arrested, they only speak their own language. And I understand that. No one wants to incriminate themselves if they are the suspect or suspected of being the suspect. So German is what we call a scarce language. It's not rare. You can get qualifications in it, Emily, as you are. But you don't get used that often, because if a German person comes over on holiday here and is a victim of crime or a witness, they will express that they speak very good English, usually. If they don't, we will provide them with a German interpreter. So there is work out there, and I'm pretty certain there'll be other German interpreters that are watching this now that will have a comment, and please do so. I'll try and get through as many questions as I can. Is there a way I can access police interpreting figures for Northern Ireland? Okay, Lorenzo, that's a really interesting one. Northern Ireland sits outside my portfolio. They contract through Northern Ireland services. The only way you could ask is a Freedom of Information Act request to the Police Service of Northern Ireland. They have very interesting numbers up there and very interesting languages. I don't want to take up too much time, but I wonder if there's anyone out here who speaks Teton. We have a community of Teton speakers in Northern Ireland who are often coming to notice of police. I am only aware of one interpreter in the whole of the UK who can speak Teton. So if you're out there, you speak Teton, you will have a very good career, particularly doing telephone interpreting. So Lorenzo, the answer is you need to do a Freedom of Information Act request. Another thank you for the presentation. I do not sign up with agencies because the rates just get worse and worse. What can you say about that? So I only work for the Southwest. Okay, the person that's put that on there, under the new police DPS, we will be setting specific rates around the country that the agencies must pay the interpreters. Now, hopefully, those of you that are watching today who are taking police work will have seen the survey that I've just put out this week, that we're asking all police interpreters to get in touch with us and tell us through that survey which forces they work for, what qualifications they have, what vetting you have, and how much do you think you should be paid. Now, I'm not going to go with the highest rate on there, but it will allow me to do some research from your answers, and I will be able to advise police forces around the country, including the Southwest, who all will be going to the new police dynamic purchasing solution and will be using an agency probably early next year. I'll be able to tell them what you believe our hourly rate should be. So if you are able to fill that in, please do so. It's on the NERPSI website. And if you work for an agency, they have circulated it. So hopefully that answers your question there. If you don't have the DPI but have a postgraduate qualification interpreting, is the DPI still required? Yes, because it's a police qualification. But if you have, and that's Eleanor that's asked that, Eleanor, if you have a postgraduate qualification at level 6, then you can always do the DPSI law elements or some of the DPI, the police interpreting law elements, and then agencies will put you on the books. If 400 hours experience is whittled down, Sue says, this isn't going to lead to a situation where professional standards and language competence are at risk, is it? Yeah, I like that question, Sue. Thank you for asking it. I need to debate this with the agencies, with the interpreters and their representative bodies. It could be that the experience is whittled down, but something I'm looking at, if we have a police situation where someone is only, and I say only, someone is likely to get a caution and be released from the station, and it's not likely to go to court, isn't that a good example of something that a newer interpreter could cut their teeth on? We're looking at ways of possibly mentoring so that a more experienced interpreter watches a less experienced interpreter. I've got 4 minutes left and I'm conscious of this. So that's a good question. We are looking at it. We will not let the standard get lower. We are also looking at providing CPD and training to interpreters. So that would be linked with that. Asking as a recent graduate, what is the best way to gain 400 hours experience? Lucy, that's a really good question. I don't have the absolute answer to that. You can join the NRPSI, get on the register and get yourself involved in health and other elements of interpreting where you don't have to have such a high qualification. This may upset some interpreters, but I'm going to say it. I believe that the police interpreters are at the very highest level. They are doing the most demanding jobs. I know it's not nice to tell someone who doesn't speak English that they have cancer or that their child has cancer, etc. I understand that. But the interpreters that are doing police work and the translators are putting themselves at risk of having to go to court and give evidence. And we have not been paying them as much as they should be paid. So we need to do something about that and elevate them. So I think the best answer that I could give you, Lucy, is go to some of the agencies and see what they say on their website. Anonymous attendee has said, I've interpreted for over 10 years, including police and other legal work. I have a DPSI, local government, so what to do? I talked about this. The fact is that we're looking to have some sort of assessment. If you've been doing it for over 10 years, all we want to do is try and make sure that you're able to do it to the standard that we expect. You haven't had training in the police aspect of law, but I guess over 10 years, you'd have picked that up. So we're not looking to penalise you. We're looking to use your services and thank you for what you've done. Anna asks, where can we follow you? Social media, blog, or any other space, please? I'm an old man. You can see from my face. I don't do social media. I came off Facebook when I went back in the police, but I do use that. But I don't have any way of using that for work. I'm on LinkedIn, and lots of interpreters are joining with me on LinkedIn and then sending me issues, questions, complaints, etc. So please look for me on LinkedIn, Mark Lewis. and I will do what I can to join with you as soon as possible. Turkin Selby's asking, how about Turkish? My favourite food. If that's what you're offering, then thank you very much. Turkish is not a language that is used very often. Turkish people become victims and witnesses, don't often become suspects, but there is work out there, and it's certainly worth getting involved and joining up. Mark, does the police officer training for interpreters? And that's Naya who's asked that question. Unfortunately, not all forces do. The Metropolitan Police do provide some training. I am looking to find some training that will be free for interpreters. If you join one of the associations, the AIT, they are doing a lot of training for interpreters using current police officers. So that's a really good thing to do. Lots of people are asking about my social web pages. I've answered that. And Lorenzo knows his stuff and says that Teton is the main language in Timor. Quite right, yep. How many of the interpreting assignments were completed by level below linguists? Yeah, this is the anonymous person again asking. I've dealt with that. They're authorised by an inspector. Thank you for those that are saying, could you give the link, please? Alina's asking for a link. I don't recall what that was. Please get in touch with me via LinkedIn and I'll provide whatever link. Someone's asked, how do we participate in the survey? And I'm gabbling now because I'm running out of time. If you go to the NERPC webpage or to LinkedIn, I've joined me on LinkedIn, I posted it, and you can participate in that survey. Is Scotland going under the DPS? Yes, it is. I'm in talks with them. Lorenzo's telling me that there are a few Teton speakers in Brussels. They need to come across to they need to come across to the Northern Ireland. Alina's saying she works for the police but didn't get the link from the big word. I'm not sure that it's actually gone out yet. I was told it will be going out either today or Monday. The question about the short test, that test hasn't been decided yet. We're just working on it. Someone's asking, do you have a list of agencies who we should be confident of working for? I hope when I finish the work that I've been doing, you should have the confidence of working with any of those agencies. In all walks of life, we have bad experiences that turn us off. I don't like British Telecom, and I won't give reasons, but we all have companies that we do like or don't like. Alina's saying it's about minimum time payments, like 3 hours, not about 1 hour. No, it isn't. I need to know what you think the hourly rate should be. It's not about minimum times. You will get a minimum of 2 hours on our framework, and there will be lots of other benefits for you, but I need to know the hourly rate. Elena, you don't have to do the survey if you don't think it's any good. Sue thinks mentoring's good. I've gone over my time. Ladies and gents, if you want to join with me, I'm so sorry that I can't help anymore with any more of these answers. I need to stop so that you can get on with other things. I'll continue to look at these questions. Please get in touch on LinkedIn. It's the only way that you can find me at the moment. We will have a website up and running soon, which will have contact details. Once the website is up and running, I will advertise it everywhere, including NERPC and on LinkedIn, so that you can all get in touch. Ladies and gents, I've really talked quickly. I apologise that I've gabbled through some of this. I hope you've all found something in it interesting. And I look forward to having discussions with you around the country, doing more presentations. If anyone wants to hear it all again, I'm doing it again Sunday afternoon at 1 o'clock. Have a good evening. Please, please stay safe, all of you. And it's been great talking to you. Unfortunately, I've not been able to see any of you, and that's not the way I normally do things. But I'm 4 minutes over, so I really must go. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to me, and I hope it has been of use.